Good day, I'm Deb Novotny. We are still in the National Cemetery, and we're talking about the Soldiers National Monument. In this segment, I would like to talk about the parts of the monument itself, starting at the very top with the figure called the Genius of Liberty. Sometimes on my early tours, I would say the Statue of Liberty. And I would have a little kid, about maybe 10 years old, look up and say, well, where's her torch? If that's the Statue of Liberty. And I would say, well, actually, this one came 17 years before France gave us that one you're familiar with in New York Harbor. So this is one of the early figures of liberty. And I said, did you ever see an old silver dollar? And of course, this 10-year-old probably said, no, I didn't, but the parents usually said, yes. Grandpap showed us one of those silver dollars that had the Liberty head on it, and that was the figure that you see up above there. She's called the Genius of Liberty here. She's holding the sword of victory, but she has the laurel wreath of peace. It's peace, okay? The North won the war, and now it's over, and you notice the sword is not up, it is down. So it's not a war symbol anymore. She's on a 3/4 size globe, so she's actually on a globe you can see there, and a flowing garments. Go down a little bit further and you see 18 large bronze stars, and that stands for the 18 northern states who had men in the Battle of Gettysburg. There were 6 states that existed in the Union states, but they didn't have any men involved in the battle. For example, California and Oregon did not have any units in this battle, I should say. If you go down a little bit further, you can see the American eagle with the shield on it. If you look on the back of the dollar bill, you can see that symbolism. But I counted those little stars one day, and it was 34. 34 states technically existed when the Battle of Gettysburg was fought. Now, I'm not counting West Virginia, because technically West Virginia did not become an official state until the 4th of July, which is the day after the battle. Well, what's a history book, as I think monuments were made back in those days, without a date? So down below that, you can see July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 1863, the 3 momentous days of the Battle of Gettysburg. Then we're going to be going around the base to look at each of the 4 figures that Randolph Rogers executed. I'm going to start with war. Over my right shoulder, your left. War is a Civil War soldier. And of course, you can see many monuments here at Gettysburg showing you figures of Union soldiers on it. But he's in a different kind of a pose if you look at him. He has his hands stretched out. He does have his rifle handy, but he is going to open his mouth at any minute to tell history, who's over my left shoulder, your right, what to write in her book, so future generations can appreciate what happened here at Gettysburg. Now, going back to war, he's got cannonballs at his foot there. You can see there's an anchor in the side of his chair. There's symbols of warfare all over this side of the monument. So war personified by the Union soldier. There was some damage done, and I think it was vandalism many years ago, and a finger was broken. It gets me every time I hear that there's vandalism on the monuments, because I can't draw a straight line without a ruler. These are works of art to me, Union and Confederate, it doesn't matter. And I think we're so lucky here at Gettysburg to have over 1,300 major monuments dotting these 6,000 acres of the battlefield. Now, the park has done some work on this memorial just a few years ago. They rehabbed pretty much the whole thing, and they fixed the digit. His forefinger is back now. But of course, it's not the original, because we probably lost that one. Now let's go over to history. Well, technically, history is Clio. That's spelled C-L-I-O. Clio was one of the ancient muses. If you go back and study mythology, there were 9 muses. In fact, that's why we say music, because they were the patroness or patron of the arts. And history, of course, history writing needed a muse. The only other muse I know, by the way, because I've never studied them all to remember them, is Calliope. Because as a kid, I would go to there's an amusement park near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania called Kennywood, and they had a Calliope at the merry-go-round. It would make the music, and that's how I learned what does Calliope mean. It comes from that ancient muse of, can't remember her exact specialty. But history has a stylus in her hand, and she's got a book, and she's going to be writing down what this man wore tells her to write down. And of course, if she's doing it right, she's getting it from the horse's mouth. She's getting it, we call it in our history studies, a primary source. I used to teach American history at Gettysburg High School, and I would always tell my students, you try to get the story as close to the fact as possible. That's a primary source. If somebody heard somebody say it, that's starting to be a secondary source. So primary sources. And of course you have to take them with a grain of salt. For example, the official records that we guides read because we want to know what the officers said that those men under their command did. So she's writing, we hope, a very good first-hand account of the Battle of Gettysburg. In her chair are symbols of ancient history. There's pyramids there. There's a column, like a Greek column. And it's really cool. There's also a palm tree, I guess, so that might represent the Fertile Crescent area. That James Batterson that I talked about, I think he had something to do with that since he was that Egyptologist. And I always knew those symbols were in the chairs, but it's only recently, doing some research on Batterson, that I found out that he liked that ancient stuff, an amateur archaeologist of a kind. Now, under Cleo's left foot are some history books. And when I look at that, I think of those 1 or 2 students that I did teach at Gettysburg High School that thought, the night before the test, I'm going to put my foot on my history book. And by osmosis, all that knowledge that Miss Novotny taught me is going to go in my brain, and I'm going to get a good score on that test. I don't think it worked very well. So that's Clio, the muse of history. We're going to take a little walk around the back of the monument to see the other 2 figures.